Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Coming up, he helped lead some of the most important and dangerous events of the civil rights movement and was the youngest speaker at the March on Washington in 1963. I talk with Representative John Lewis about how he's still trying to keep Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream alive. That's next on Dialogue. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. Some people are present when history is made, others make history. My guest today is one such person. Representative John Lewis was a poor child in Alabama when he heard the words of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. on the radio. He decided right then that he felt compelled to both meet the man and change his own life. Within just a few years, he had achieved both goals and found himself the youngest member of Reverend King's inner circle. Lewis would go on to help organize some of the most seminal activities of the African-American civil rights movement, including the Freedom Rides in Mississippi and the March from Selma to Montgomery. Along the way, he would be seriously injured in beatings by state troopers and white mobs. Eventually, Lewis became a U.S. representative from Georgia, a post he's held for nearly 30 years. He's now the only surviving member of the so-called Big Six leaders of the civil rights movement and the recipient of our country's highest civilian honor, the Medal of Freedom. The author of 2 books about his life, he's recently ventured into new literary territory with a comic book trilogy about the civil rights movement called March that he's writing with one of his staffers. Now, Representative Lewis was at the Sun Valley Writers Conference in 2014 to talk about his life and his new book. I spoke with him there about his legacy and the challenges for the next generation of civil rights leaders. Thanks so much for being here. Welcome to Idaho.
But thank you very much. I am delighted.
Idahoans did come to the March on Washington, didn't they?
There were many people from church organizations that came and participated in the March on Washington on August 28, 1963. I can never forget a large banner representing religious groups in Idaho.
So that stood out to you?
It was very visible to see people from so far away from Washington, where you didn't have that many minority, and especially African American.
You know, Idaho was one of the last states to endorse Martin Luther King Jr. Day holiday. And in fact, it's not even called that. It's called Martin Luther King Jr. Idaho Human Rights Day, something like that, because there were enough people still opposed to Martin Luther King himself as a figure that they didn't want to call it that. Is that something that's bothered you over the years, that, you know, states don't want to recognize just Martin Luther King Jr.?
I never understood why people in some parts of America did not want to grant Dr. King a national holiday. Martin Luther King did so much to free and liberate all America, not just African American, but white, Latino, Asian American, and Native American. Our country is a different country. Our world is a different world and a better world because of the leadership of this one man. He preached the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence.
This past year, actually a couple of years, you've seen 50th anniversaries of some major events, among them, of course, the passage of the Civil Rights Act. Tell me how that's been for you as an individual, the last of the Big Six leaders still alive, to reach this 50-year milestone. Has it been emotional for you?
It's been quite emotional and almost unbelievable to look back 50 years later. I remember so well when we met together, the Big Six, started planning the March on Washington with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others, meeting with President Kennedy, telling him we were going to march on Washington.
He wasn't always too happy. He wasn't too happy about that.
No, the president was not that supportive of the idea of a march on Washington. He raised the question and said, won't there be violence and chaos and disorder You would never get a civil rights bill through the Congress. And it was Mr. Randolph, A. Philip Randolph, the Dean of Black Leadership, who spoke up and said in his baritone voice, "Mr. President, this will be an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent protest." And we left that meeting with President Kennedy. I remember it so well. And we said, we had a meaningful and productive meeting with the president. And we told him we were going to march on Washington. And at the first meeting, we invited 4 major white religious and labor leaders to join us in issuing the call for the march. So with 10 of us that spoke. And the march went so well. I spoke number 6. Dr. King spoke number 10. And when the march was all over, President Kennedy invited us back down to the White House, and he stood in the door of the Oval Office. He was beaming like a proud father. He kept saying, "You did a good job, you did a good job." And when he got to Dr. King, he said, "You did a good job, and you had a dream."
And is that dream still alive?
Well, I believe the dream is still alive. We got past the 64 Civil Rights Act. A year later, the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 65. And we made so much progress. We come such a distance. And when I hear people saying nothing has changed, I feel like saying, come and walk in my shoes. I grew up in rural Alabama, attended school in Tennessee, lived in Georgia the past 51 years. And when I was growing up, I saw those signs that said white men, white women, colored women, white waiting, colored waiting. Those signs are gone, and they will not return. The only places our children and their children will see those signs today will be in a book, in a museum, or on a video.
Is there a particular burden or responsibility that you feel, being the last of the big 6 leaders, to continually educate about these issues?
It is not so much a burden, but I feel like I have an obligation, a mission to do what I can to continue to tell the story and to be a witness, just to be a witness. And say to people, this is what happened, this is how it happened. And we made progress, but we're not quite there yet. We have to continue to work to lay down the burden of race and create what Dr. King called a beloved community, where we respect the dignity and the worth of every human being. And it doesn't matter whether we're Black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American. We're one people, we're one family, we're one house. We all live in the American house or the world house.
Is the new book, March, part of this obligation, responsibility you feel to educate the next generation?
March, this book 1, book 2, book 3, would be, I believe, a strong instrument, a powerful tool to say to young people and to those not so young that may not have been old enough, or not old enough to remember what happened and how it happened, that the methods and philosophy that guided us to bring about the changes we have in America today. If someone had told me back in 1963 or 1965, that the March on Washington, the march from Selma to Montgomery, that we would be where we are today, I probably would say you're crazy. You're out of your mind, you don't know what you're talking about. If someone had told me that I would live to see a man of color in the White House, I don't know what I would have said, but I would have been in disbelief. So when President Barack Obama was elected president that night in 08, I cried. And some members of the press asked me, why are you crying so much? I said, there's tears of happiness, there's tears of joy. So what are you going to do when he's inaugurated? I said, if I have some tears left, I'm going to cry some more. That's exactly what I did.
Did you feel the presence of the other leaders with you that day? Martin Luther King and Mr. Randolph?
On the day that he was inaugurated, as he was delivering his inaugural address, I looked past him. I saw the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument. I thought about President Kennedy, his brother Robert Kennedy. I thought about President Johnson. But I thought about Martin Luther King Jr., other leaders. I thought about the 3 civil rights workers that were beaten, shot, and killed, and the countless number of young people that came to Mississippi in the summer of 1964. The young people and people not so young that stood in the unmovable lines in Selma, Alabama. And it's impossible to forget the people who paid the supreme sacrifice.
Do you go back to the Lincoln Memorial sometimes, just by yourself?
I go back to the Lincoln Memorial and I stand in this very spot where we stood more than 50 years ago. I go back to Selma and walk across that bridge. I go to the King Memorial in Washington, D.C. It's good to go back, to be reminded, to sort of feel the spirit that existed years ago.
The book March, again, you probably never thought that you'd be writing a graphic novel. This is a very interesting story to me. You had a staffer who came up with this idea, and it resonated with you, didn't it?
This young man, Andrew Aydin, said to me, "Congressman, you should write a comic book." And I didn't know how to respond. I just said, no, I don't.
Because he was interested in comics.
Well, he grew up reading comics.
Yeah.
And he understood the power of comics. And it reminded me that when I was very young, only about 17, 18, I read a comic book called Martin Luther King Jr. and the Montgomery Story.
We have this here. We should say it's in reprint.
Well, this little book, back in 1960, 57, 58, it sold for 10 cents, 14 pages. It inspired me to attend the nonviolent workshops, to study the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. And it led me through the sit-ins, the Freedom Ride. And he came back to me and said, "You really should write it, this book.
About your own life, right?
Tell the story of your own life." And I finally said, "Only if you would do it with me." And that's the way we did it.
And it's been a fun journey, hasn't it? You went to Comic-Con and met all the comic buffs, and we should say it debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list.
Well, the book is doing very, very well. I'm very proud of it. I'm so happy that this young man, Andrew Aydin, said to me and convinced me that we should write this book. And
because a comic reaches, well, were you trying to reach the next generation necessarily with the comic book? Is that what you're trying to do?
Well, we were really trying to educate and inspire another generation, especially young people, students, or young children. But it's also reaching hundreds and thousands of adults that are reading the book. College students are reading the book. And people walk up to me and say, "I love your book. I love the book." I've had people my age come up and give me a hug, or start crying, saying thank you for doing it.
You don't mince words, so to speak, in this comic book. As you just described growing up, you saw signs. Those signs are in the comic book. The N-word is in the comic book. That was intentional, yes, to really reinforce visually as well as with words what was happening.
We had to. We had to make it plain, had to make it simple, had to tell the truth so people would know what happened and how it happened. And that's what I think comedy is all about, the illustration.
They're fabulous.
Uh,
It-
I love it. I hate to say it, but I love it. I love the drama, seeing people moving. And that's what the movement was all about, excitement. See people walking, crawling, sitting in, and someone pulling you off the lunch counter stool, pouring hot water on you, kicking you. It's all there.
It's very visual. It's right at eye level, which is interesting. And you talk a lot in your book, Walking with the Wind, on which March is based, about what's called the spirit of history. Some people might call it fate or divine providence. You call it the spirit of history. It was almost, to me, seems like the spirit of history brought you and this young man together to use this modality to reach a new generation.
Oh,
All the pieces came together.
I'm convinced. We have never really discussed it in this light, but you reminded me. I'm convinced that it's something in the order thing. Call it fate, but I call it the spirit of history that brought us together at this time in this space to help move us much further down that road to creating the beloved community, a community at peace with itself, not just an American community, but a world community.
Tell me what's left down that road for you. What are some of the things still undone and the pieces of pavement yet to walk on?
Well, I think here in America, we got to learn to live together. We got to leave this little piece of real estate that we call America a little cleaner, a little more peaceful, and a little more loving. Leave people with a sense of happiness. Why do we have to be so mean to each other? Why? Is it possible for us just to respect all human beings? We got to stop spending so much of our limited resources on bombs and missiles and guns and take care of people here at home and around the world.
In one of your books, you say that you have not seen a level of rancor in politics like this in your lifetime, even surpassing what happened in the 1960s, which was very interesting for me to read. That you feel it's gotten, that much worse.
But during the 60s, the national level, we had people coming together. It really didn't matter whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or independent. If you visit my office in Washington, D.C., you will see on the morning of the March on Washington, the 10 of us, including Martin Luther King Jr., standing together with Republican members of the Senate and the House, working together to get the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed, and later working together to get the Voting Rights Act passed. Is it possible for people to lay down the burden of differences?
Could that same bill be passed, or act be passed today?
Oh, if the Civil Rights Bill or the Voting Rights Act was before the Congress today, I think it would be almost impossible to get it passed. In the Congress, like in the great part of America, I think we need to, again, teach people the way of peace, the way of love, the way of nonviolence. Is it possible for us to come together again and look out for all of our citizens? Is it possible for us to have comprehensive immigration reform and not leave millions and millions of human beings living in fear?
Is it?
It's possible. I believe it is possible. You can never give up. You can never give in or give out. You have to keep the faith and continue to push and pull.
What is causing the rift right now?
I'm not so sure, but I have this strange feeling that in American politics, not just at the national level, but even the local level, we have men and women emerging that want to be elected to a responsible position, but they don't believe in government. They really don't believe in service. You have people who love the world, but they don't like people. And sometimes I feel like maybe we should conduct nonviolent workshops with local and national political leaders.
Well, I noticed when I was reading this comic book from the 50s, it says here in the back how the Montgomery method works. The second thing is much harder. God loves your enemy too, and that makes him important to you. To see your enemy as a human being, you have to stop seeing him as your enemy.
Well, I think that's the essence of it. When we're born into this world, we come innocent little creatures, little babies. We're not born hating or putting someone down because of their beliefs, their faith, of their party identification. The way of love is a better way.
You make me think of the very emotional and poignant apologies you have received over the years from people who assaulted you in some instances. Tell our viewers about one of those, because I think it's quite instructive.
Well, in May of 1961, during the Freedom Ride, when I was 21 years old, had all of my hair and a few pounds lighter, we attempted to desegregate a waiting room at a Greyhound bus station. And a group of young men attacked us and left us lying in a pool of blood. Many years later, more than 50 years later, one of the guys who had been a member of the Klan came to my office in Washington with his son. His son had been encouraging his father to seek out the people that he had wronged. And this man came to my office and said, "Mr. Lewis, I'm one of the people who beat you and left you bloody. I want to apologize. Will you forgive me?" His son started crying. He started crying. I started crying. They hugged me. I hugged them back. And we called each other brothers. And I saw this man 3 other times. But I've had people in my native state of Alabama, in Georgia, walk up to me and say, "I want to apologize to you for what we did." One young man came up and said, "I want to apologize to you on behalf of all of the white people of Alabama." I've had police chiefs who, one in particular, met me at a church meeting in Montgomery and said, "When you came in Montgomery, our police department stood away and it allowed a mob to beat you. So we have a better police department today. They must know something about nonviolence, something about Martin Luther King Jr., about Rosa Parks, about Selma, about what happened in Montgomery, what happened in Birmingham." He went on to say, "Because of what you did and the admiration I have for you," he said, "I'm going to take off my badge. I'm going to give you my badge." And I said, "Chief, you can't do that. You're the chief of police. You need your badge." He said, "Congressman, I can get another one."
That's when you know things have changed.
Yes, yes.
That the good people outnumber the bad.
I'm convinced that good people all over this land outnumber the bad one. But we have to continue to educate, to teach, to inspire, and never ever give up on anyone.
For people who are discouraged, how do you inspire them to keep going?
I said to everyone, be not discouraged. Don't give up. Keep your faith. Keep your eyes on the prize. Hang in there. There's a way out. You have to be hopeful. You have to be optimistic. It's in keeping with the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence to be hopeful, to be optimistic. I got arrested 40 times during the 60s. Been arrested 5 times since I've been in Congress. Been left bloody and unconscious. Had a concussion on that bridge in Selma on Bloody Sunday. But I'm still hopeful, still optimistic. I still believe that we can overcome and redeem the soul of America and create the beloved community. And if we can get it right here in America, maybe, just maybe, we'll be a model, an example for the rest of the world.
And be not afraid, right?
Be not afraid. When the troopers put on their gas masks and came toward us, beating us with nightsticks and bullwhips, tramping us with horses, I thought I saw death. I thought I was going to die, but I was not afraid.
You were liberated.
It freed me. It liberated me. It made me a better human being. You have to be prepared to stand up for what you believe in, to speak up, speak out, and be prepared to give it your all. When we went on a freedom ride, we were prepared to die. Not just to give a little blood, but prepared to die to desegregate public transportation in the American South. Some people said that we should cool off, that we should end the freedom ride, but we couldn't. You have to go on and see what the end is going to be. You have to be hopeful and optimistic that it all is going to work out. That's what I believed then. That's what I believe now.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing some of your optimism with us and your spirit of history. It's been a pleasure and an honor to talk with you.
But thank you very much for having me.
You've been listening to Representative John Lewis, one of our country's most important civil rights leaders. I spoke with Lewis at the 2014 Sun Valley Writers Conference. To learn more or to watch this interview again, check out the Dialogue website. Just go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue. That's also where you see a Dialogue Extra I taped with Andrew Aydin, Representative Lewis's co-author for March. I think you'll really enjoy that conversation. For Dialogue, I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for tuning in.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.